Good morning, and welcome to Karma Stories. Wishing you a day full of peace, truth, and just enough karma to keep things interesting. Stay with us for real tales where justice always finds its way. She didn't come to start a war, but when the president of the Pelican Shore HOA threatened to bulldoze her grandfather's mangrove forest, I had no choice but to draw a line in the mud. If you've ever lived under a ruthless HOA, you know how power hides behind fine print and forced smiles. But this was different. This wasn't just about lawn height or fence color. This was about legacy, about land that remembered, and about a woman who refused to forget. By the time Mai stood before the county board, drenched from the storm and holding a folder of forgotten documents, the room had split. One half saw her as a nuisance, the other as the voice of something ancient. And somewhere deep in the mangroves, the trees stood still waiting to see who would speak for them. I followed a lot of stories about corruption, about greed, about HOA power gone mad. But this one, it reached into something older, something that asked not just what is legal, but what is right. I want to know what you think. Would you have stayed and fought? Would you have lit that lantern like her grandfather once did? Leave your thoughts below. Let's begin the story. Florida. It still hit me with that same humid embrace. But returning to Pelican Shores felt less like a homecoming and more like walking onto a meticulously curated, slightly hostile movie set. I'm Mai Tran, 26, marine biologist by trade, and now, apparently, the reluctant inheritor of my grandfather's ramshackle house and his fiercely guarded legacy, the wild, untamed mangrove forest that abutted his property. He'd been a refugee, a man who understood what it meant to fight for a patch of ground. For a place to breathe. Now, his fight was mine. Pelican Shores HOA, presided over by the impeccably smarmy Bartholomew Rexford, was the antithesis of everything Grandpa's land stood for. Rexford, with his permatan and a smile that could curdle milk, had already announced his grand vision, an ecological beautification initiative. Even the name was a pristine lie. It was doublespeak for destruction, a plan to tidy up the mangroves, which, in HOA parlance, meant gutting a vital ecosystem for prettier waterfront views for the McMansions. My scientist brain screamed foul. My gut, inherited from generations of stubborn trance, knew this was just the opening salvo. The first physical evidence came a week later. A few strategically chosen mangrove saplings near my property line ones I'd been observing for their resilience were hacked down, not neatly pruned, but brutally severed. A sterile white sign hammered into the pluff mud declared, "Property of Pelican Shores HOA, area slated for ecological improvement. Do not tamper. Improvement, right? Like a lobotomy improves a personality." Then came the official barrage. The HOA's preferred method of psychological warfare. Crisp envelopes appeared with unnerving regularity, slipped under my door like silent, paper-thin assassins. Violation notice. Non-conforming floral arrangements, Bylaw Article 4, Section 2C, indigenous weeds, exceeding permitted aesthetic parameters. My indigenous weeds were native wildflowers, crucial for local pollinators. Violation notice. Unapproved landscape topography community guideline 11. Corner, deviation from homogeneous elevation standards. My yard had natural dips and rises. Theirs were as flat and boring as a corporate mission statement. Fines. Warnings of escalating fines. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. The whispers started soon after. I'd catch them at the communal mailbox kiosk, or when I dared to buy overpriced artisanal bread at the Pelican Shores village shop. That's her, the one in the old Tran place. Doesn't even try to keep her yard up. Such a shame. Heard she's arguing with Rexford about the mangroves. The newcomer, breaking all the rules, breaking their rules. Maybe. But I was trying to uphold the laws of nature, the ones that actually mattered. The isolation, though, that was a new kind of chill. One afternoon, while sifting through Grandpa's cluttered desk for any old survey maps, I found his old oil lamp, a heavy, brass thing, its glass chimney smudged with soot. He used to keep it on the small, rickety watchtower he'd built at the edge of his property, overlooking the mangroves. He'd light it every evening, a small beacon against the encroaching darkness, a silent vigil. I took it out to the tower, the wood groaning under my weight. The view was breathtaking, especially now, at dawn, A flight of white egrets, impossibly graceful, glided over the dense green canopy, their wings catching the first golden rays. This was what they wanted to destroy, this serene, vibrant life. I resolved to light the lamp that night, a small act of defiance, a nod to Grandpa. The discovery of the cut saplings and the escalating harassment pushed me from passive resistance to active investigation. If Rexford and his cronies were this aggressive, what else were they capable of? My marine biology training kicked in. Observe, collect data, analyze. I started digging into Pelican Shore's history. Old county records, digitized newspaper archives, online forums where disgruntled ex-residents occasionally vented. A pattern began to emerge. 20 years ago, this stretch of coast wasn't Pelican Shore's luxury enclave. It was a working waterfront, home to a small, tight-knit fishing community. Families who'd been here for generations. Then came the developers, the initial HOA formation, and a slow, insidious campaign of rising fees, new regulations, and eminent domain whispers. The fishermen were squeezed out, their modest homes replaced by these gleaming white mausoleums. Rexford hadn't just materialized. He was a veteran of this kind of subtle, legalistic warfare. He always said they were sharks in polo shirts. A voice startled me. I nearly dropped the rusty pair of binoculars I'd found in Grandpa's tower. I was up there, the newly lit oil lamp casting a warm, flickering glow beside me as dusk settled. Below, an older woman stood at my fence line, her face partially obscured by the brim of a wide gardening hat. Even in the fading light, she was Hispanic, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, but also held a spark of something fiery. "Ma'am, your grandfather. He said that about the first wave of them. The developers," she gestured vaguely towards the rows of identical houses. "I'm Dolores. Lived next door to him for 40 years. Knew him. Well." A faint blush. "Even in the twilight. Heard you're having a bit of trouble with Rexford's welcoming committee." Dolores. The name rang a bell. A faded photograph in one of Grandpa's albums. Him, younger, beaming, arm around a vibrant woman with a flower in her hair. My grandfather's old flame. "You could say that," I admitted, a wry smile playing on my lips. "They seem to think my wildflowers are a public menace." Dolores chuckled, a rich, earthy sound. "They think anything that isn't sprayed, pruned, and paved is a menace. Your grandpa fought them tooth and nail over every blade of grass, every mangrove root. That lamp." She nodded towards it. "He lit it every night. Said it was to guide the lost spirits of the fish and to keep the land sharks at bay." "He told me about the fishing village," I said, descending the tower steps. "Or, I found out about how they were pushed out." Dolores's expression hardened. "Pushed out. Honey, they were evicted by 1,000 bureaucratic paper cuts, just like they're trying with you. Rexford was part of that. Younger then, but just as slippery. They called it progress. Community enhancement. Same damn song. Different verse. He's using the same playbook for the mangroves. Of course. He is," Dolores said, her voice dropping. "More waterfront. Higher property values for the lots furthest inland. Once the view is unobstructed. It's always about the money." "My? Always. Did anyone fight back then, besides Grandpa?" "A few. But they picked us off one by one. Accusations. Liens. Violations. Divided us. Your grandfather was the most stubborn. They hated him for it, and loved him. Some of them, for the same reason." Her eyes twinkled. The next morning, another official envelope. This one was thicker. A notice of intent to enforce covenants and restrictions, complete with a demand for remediation of landscape deficiencies within 7 days, or the HOA would hire their own contractors at my expense, naturally, and place a lien on the property. I looked at the oil lamp, still faintly warm from the night. I looked at the egrets, already taking flight over the mangroves. "Not on my watch." "Rexford," I muttered. Dolores had given me more than just history. She'd given me a thread, a connection to a past fight, and a potential ally. The Pelican Shores, HOA, might think they were dealing with just one newcomer breaking the rules. They were about to find out they were dealing with my Tran, marine biologist, granddaughter of a mangrove defender. And now, a very pissed-off resident with a growing understanding of just how deep the rot in Pelican Shores went. The first cut had been theirs. The next move would be mine, and it wouldn't be a beautification. It would be a reckoning. That notice of intent from Rexford and his band of beige bandits wasn't just a threat. It was a dare. Remediate landscape deficiencies. My vibrant, life-sustaining yard a deficiency. The sheer audacity of it fueled a new kind of fire. If they wanted to play hardball with legalese, I needed more than just righteous indignation. I needed ammunition, something concrete from Grandpa's arsenal. Dolores had been a spark. Your grandpa fought them tooth and nail, she'd said. So, I started tearing through his house, not just looking, but excavating. The place was a chaotic archive of a life lived fully. Fishing charts yellowed with age, stacks of National Geographics, half-finished boat models. In his old roll-top desk, beneath a pile of tide tables, I found it, a thick, official-looking document. Memorandum of Understanding between Martin Tran and Collier County Parks and Recreation, dated 1987. It wasn't just an understanding, it was a goddamn stewardship agreement, granting a community custodianship of the mangrove forest to a group named the Gladesmen Collective Local Fishermen, with Grandpa listed as a primary signatory tasked with its preservation and sustainable use. My heart hammered. This wasn't just Grandpa's whim, this was county-sanctioned. I practically flew next door, document clutched in my hand like a winning lottery ticket. Dolores was tending her immaculate rose bushes, a stark, beautiful contrast to my wild domain. Dolores, look at this. She read it, her lips moving silently, a slow smile spreading across her face. Martin, you clever old fox, she murmured. He never mentioned the official stamp, just said he had an arrangement. Well, then, her eyes softened. There's something else you should see, something he entrusted to me a long time ago, for safekeeping. Or maybe, she gave me a knowing look. For the right time, she led me into her cool, shaded living room, filled with the scent of old books and lemon polish. From a carved wooden chest, she pulled out a smaller, intricately inlaid box. His journals, letters, mostly in Vietnamese, some in English. He wanted his story known, eventually. That night, with Grandpa's oil lamp flickering beside me in the watchtower, I plunged into his past. The elegant, forceful script, sometimes shaky, told of a harrowing escape from Vietnam, the terrifying uncertainty of a refugee camp, the long journey to America. He wrote of his arrival in Florida, the solace he found in the wildness of the mangroves, how they reminded him of the deltas of home. He wrote of the fishing community that took him in, of shared struggles and fierce loyalties. And he wrote of Dolores, with a tenderness that made my throat ache. This wasn't just a fight about trees. It was about a promise made by a man who had lost everything and found refuge, then dedicated his life to protecting that refuge for others. The watchtower itself held more secrets. Remembering Dolores's comment about Grandpa being a clever old fox, I started tapping walls, checking floorboards. Under a loose plank beneath the built-in bench, I found a shallow, lead-lined compartment. Inside, more documents, faded survey maps that looked older than the county's official versions, with handwritten annotations detailing boundary lines that extended further than Pelican Shores acknowledged. There were old photographs of the fishing village, families, boats, a vibrant community, and files, meticulously kept, detailing early skirmishes with developers, complaints filed, and, chillingly, instances of intimidation. This wasn't just a defense. It was a counteroffensive waiting to be launched. One of Grandpa's journal entries mentioned a packed tree, deep in the mangroves. Dolores knew it. The next morning, she guided me, her steps surprisingly nimble for her age, through the winding water channels in Grandpa's old, flat-bottomed skiff. We found it. A massive, ancient red mangrove, its prop roots like the buttresses of a cathedral, carved into its weathered trunk, almost consumed by bark but still legible, were a series of names, Grandpa's prominent among them, encircling a crude drawing of an anchor and the words, Guardians of the Green, we swear. Evidence of community self-governance, etched in living wood. The Gladesmen Collective, Dolores said softly. Most are gone now, or moved away after after the changes. But Howard Jensen, he's still around, lives over in Naples now, but his heart's still here. Finding Mr. Howard was like finding a living piece of history. He was old, his skin like tanned leather, but his eyes were sharp, his handshake firm. When I showed him the stewardship agreement and the photos, his face lit up. Marty Tran's granddaughter. Damn right. I remember that agreement. We were the custodians. Rexford and his lawyers said it wasn't valid anymore, that the collective dissolved. We didn't dissolve. They just made it impossible to fish, to live. He and a few other former residents I tracked down with his help painted a grim picture of HOA encroachment, blocked access to boat ramps, sudden environmental fines for their traditional fishing practices, a relentless campaign to wear them down. Another voice from the past emerged unexpectedly at a small Vietnamese grocery store in Naples, where I'd gone to find ingredients that reminded me of Grandpa's cooking. The owner, Mr. Pham, a wiry man with kind eyes, overheard me mentioning Pelican Shores and my grandfather's name, Martin Tran. From the Mangroves, he asked. His voice hushed. He saved my crew. Years ago, during Hurricane Agnes, we were out on a shrimper, got caught, radio dead. He guided us in, right through the narrowest channels of those mangroves in the pitch black. That forest, it was our salvation. He was a hero. He shook his head. They want to destroy that. Some things are more precious than a clear view. My scientific work in the mangroves continued, a counterpoint to the historical detective work. The subtle shift of the seasons was visible here. The deep summer green slowly tinged with the paler yellows of autumn. A quiet, relentless transformation. And during one of my transect surveys, I saw it, a flash of iridescent blue and crimson. A bird unlike anything in my field guides. Small, elusive, with a call I didn't recognize. Days of patient observation later, I had photos, recordings. My heart pounded with a different kind of excitement. This could be an unrecorded species, a new discovery, another urgent reason to protect this unique habitat. But the more I dug, the more I prepared to fight, the more the Pelican Shores harmony, as Rexford sickeningly called it, began to fracture. It wasn't just the old guard versus the HOA anymore. Some of the younger residents, people my age or a bit older, who'd bought into the lifestyle, the promise of rising property values, started to push back. You know, my property taxes are high enough without you stirring up trouble. A sleek young lawyer named Chad, who lived 3 houses down, accosted me one afternoon as I was unloading soil amendments for my deficient yard. This isn't just about property taxes. Chad, I said, trying to keep my cool. This is about an ecosystem and a legal agreement. Legal agreement. Rexford said that old fisherman's club thing is defunct. Look, we all want progress, better views, better amenities. That's why we moved here. You can't live in the past. The past has a funny way of affecting the present, especially when it involves illegal land grabs and environmental destruction, I retorted. He just scoffed. You tree huggers are all the same, always standing in the way of progress. The lines were being drawn. Rexford's army of manicured lawns and HOA acolytes on one side. On my side, a feisty old woman, a handful of displaced fishermen, the ghost of my grandfather, his flickering lamp, a secret cellar full of documents, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny, undiscovered bird. It wasn't exactly an army, but it was a start. The air in Pelican Shores was getting charged, the calm before a storm that had nothing to do with the weather, and I had a feeling the first gust was about to hit. My little band of allies, Dolores, Mr. Howard, the lingering spirit of Grandpa, and a potentially undiscovered avian resident, felt like a fragile shield against the storm Rexford was brewing. And brew it he did. The man didn't believe in subtlety when outright thuggery dressed in a lawyer's suit would do. First, a heavy chain and a glaring "No trespassing" HOA property sign appeared, blocking the small, traditional access point to the lagoon that the old fishing community, and subsequently Grandpa, had used for decades. It was a blatant power play, a middle finger to history and convenience. Then came the official letters from Rexford, Finch and Associates, a law firm that probably specialized in making small animals cry. The demand for payment for my landscape deficiencies was now accompanied by threats of wage garnishment and property seizure. My deficiencies, of course, were their leverage. The local rag, the Pelican Shore's weekly Gazette motto, all the news that fits between real estate ads, suddenly featured a glowing profile of Rexford as a community visionary, alongside a not-so-subtly critical piece about newer residents failing to integrate with established community standards. No names were mentioned, but the photo accompanying the article, a wide shot of several pristine HOA-approved lawns with my gloriously wild yard, visible in the background like a rebellious teenager in a family portrait, told its own story. Then the digital attacks began. A sleazy-looking blog, https Google.com search, Pelican Truth Now, com, which I suspected was run out of Rexford's golf buddy's basement, popped up. It featured a grainy, obviously photoshopped image of me, supposedly dumping chemicals into the mangroves. Under the headline, Exclusive, Newcomers' Eco-Activism a Front for Invasive Planning. The comments section was a cesspool of anonymous vitriol. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about bylaws anymore. This was character assassination. The ugliness spilled offline quickly. I woke one morning to find the swamp is ours, spray-painted in angry red letters across the faded wooden sign Grandpa had hand-carved. Transcend Mangrove Sanctuary. A few days later, Chad the lawyer and a couple of his polo-shirted acolytes were out front, hammering a professionally printed "Sell or Leave. Protect Pelican Shores. Values. Sign into my yard." My yard? The audacity was breathtaking. I ripped it out, the metal post bending in my hands, and threw it back onto Chad's unnervingly perfect zoysia grass. He just smirked from his window. The next HOA meeting was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Rexford sat on his little dais, flanked by his board, looking like a tin-pot dictator, when Dolores, her voice trembling but resolute, stood up to question the lagoon access closure. Citing decades of community use, Rexford banged his gavel. "Mrs. Hernandez, that matter is under legal review and not open for public discussion. Next agenda item. Mr. Howard tried to present the stewardship agreement. This document, signed with the county. Mr. Jensen?" Rexford cut him off, his voice dripping with false patience. "We've already addressed this. That collective is defunct. Your document is irrelevant. Security. Please ensure we stick to the agenda." Two beefy guys in HOA security shirts moved to flank Mr. Howard, who sank back into his seat, defeated. The message was clear. Dissent would be silenced. I walked home from that meeting feeling hollowed out. The weight of it all, the legal threats, the public shaming, the vandalism, the sheer, unyielding arrogance of Rexford and his minions, pressed down on me. My little patch of rebellion felt like a very small, very lonely island. For the first time, I seriously considered what Chad had yelled. Sell. Leave. Was this worth it? Could I even win? I slumped onto Grandpa's old armchair, the flickering oil lamp in the watchtower outside my window, doing little to dispel the gloom in my heart. Dolores must have sensed my despair. She came over later, not with advice, but with the wooden box of Grandpa's journals. "There's one more thing in here," she said quietly. "A letter. He told me to give it to you if things got really tough." It was in a separate envelope, addressed simply to my star. His English was formal, a little stilted, but the love poured through every word. He wrote of his own moments of despair, of wanting to give up when the developers first circled. "They will try to make you small," he wrote. "They will try to make you doubt the truth in your heart. But the land remembers. The water remembers. Your spirit is of this place now, as mine was. Fight not because you hate what is in front of you, but because you love what is behind you, and what still can be." Tears streamed down my face as I looked up. Through the window, a flash of white caught my eye. The egrets, a whole squadron of them, gliding silently over the dark canopy of the mangroves, their forms luminous against the twilight sky. It was as if the forest itself was echoing Grandpa's words, offering a silent, breathtaking affirmation. The land remembers. Enough? No more despair. It was time to fight smarter. The next day, I started calling environmental law firms. Most gave me the polite brush-off or quoted retainers that would require selling a kidney. Then I found Eva Sharma, young, hungry, with a fire in her voice that matched the nascent blaze in my own gut. She worked for a small non-profit environmental justice center, an HOA using these kinds of tactics to potentially destroy a protected wetland and override a county stewardship agreement. She said after I'd poured out the whole sordid story and a possible new bird species, Monsieur Tran. This isn't just a case. This is a crusade. I'm in. Pro bono. Eva was a whirlwind. Together, we started formalizing my grandfather's meticulous record-keeping. We established a small, discreet biological monitoring station at the edge of my property, using trail cams and audio recorders to document the wildlife. My potential new bird, the snook and juvenile tarpon in the channels, the raccoons and occasional bobcat that used the mangroves as a highway. Data. Undeniable. Scientific data. During one of our research sessions, poring over Grandpa's ancient survey maps and cross-referencing them with county archives Eva had unearthed, we found something extraordinary. One of Grandpa's handwritten notes on a particularly old map indicated ancient Shell Midden, possible Calusa site, deep within the densest part of the mangrove forest, on a slightly elevated hammock. If this land wasn't just ecologically vital, but also an unrecorded Native American burial ground or significant archaeological site, Rexford's beautification plans would become a federal issue. We needed an archaeologist, and fast. The fight was far from over, but the tide felt like it was beginning to turn. And then, another unexpected development. My sporadic, frustrated posts on a local conservation forum, using the hashtag #SavePelicanShoresMangroves. Grandpa would have chuckled at the idea of a hashtag, had apparently caught someone's attention. A young woman with a determined set to her jaw and a notepad in her hand appeared at my doorstep. "Maitran," she asked. "My name is Lena Washington. I'm a reporter with the Miami Herald. I heard there was a bit of a David versus Goliath story happening down here with an HOA and some very important trees. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I looked from Lena to Eva, who was setting up a water quality testing kit nearby. The oil lamp still glowed in the watchtower. The egrets were probably settling in for the night. David versus Goliath. Yeah, that sounded about right. And Goliath, in the form of Bartholomew Rexford, was about to find out that David had just found a slingshot, a lawyer, and the press. Game on. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. Lena Washington, the reporter from the Miami Herald, was a breath of fresh, albeit interrogative, air. She wasn't just interested in the fluffy concerned citizen versus HOA angle. She had a nose for the rot beneath the surface. David versus Goliath. She'd called it. If only she knew Goliath was currently sweating bullets and likely shredding documents. Her presence acted like a magnet for whispers. Eva and I had been painstakingly piecing together Rexford's financial dealings through public records, trying to trace the money flusso for the Ecological Beautification Initiative. Lena's arrival seemed to loosen tongues. A former county clerk, now retired and living 2 towns over, reached out to Lena after seeing my Save Pelican Shores Mangroves hashtag amplified by a statewide environmental group. He hinted at irregularities in zoning applications for waterfront properties bordering Pelican Shores years ago, around the time Rexford was solidifying his power. Armed with this tip, Ava, with her legal tenacity, dug deeper. It took days of sifting through archived planning commission minutes and land use permits. But then she found it. A series of expedited zoning variances, approved with minimal oversight, that conveniently reclassified buffer zones around the mangroves. The official who signed off on them, a man later quietly censured for ethics violations and who, according to property records Eva unearthed, suddenly purchased a beachfront condo well above his pay grade shortly after. The stench of bribery was unmistakable. Rexford hadn't just bent the rules, he'd bought new ones. "This is big." Eva said, her eyes gleaming with righteous fury as she spread the documents on Grandpa's old kitchen table. This isn't just HOA overreach. This is potential criminal conspiracy. As if on cue, Lena's first article dropped, not in the Herald's main paper initially, too slow, too much internal bureaucracy, but on their independent investigative blog, Florida Unfiltered, Whispers of the Mangrove, Paradise Lost, or Plundered. It was headlined. It laid out the historical displacement of the fishing community, the ecological significance of the mangroves, my initial struggles, and hinted at deeper financial machinations. It didn't name names regarding the bribery yet, but the implication was heavy. The article sent a shockwave through Pelican shores. Rexford, I heard through Dolores, whose intelligence network was better than the CIA's, was apoplectic. The Pelican Truth Now blog went into overdrive, accusing Lena of being my paid mouthpiece and a socialist agitator. Then, a beat-up sedan pulled up to my house late one evening. The driver, a nervous-looking man I vaguely recognized from Mr. Howard's descriptions of former Gladesman Collective members, practically threw a padded envelope onto my porch before speeding off. Inside was a portable hard drive and a scribbled note. Marty Tran was a good man. Rexford needs to pay. Don't say where you got this. Ava and I huddled over my laptop. The drive contained audio files, recordings of old HOA meetings. One, labeled Executive Session, Mangrove Strategy, was pure gold. Or rather, pure toxic sludge. Rexford's voice, unmistakable, boomed through the tiny speakers. And I don't care what it takes. We will clear that goddamn swamp for the new development phase. Views? People. Views? That's what sells. If I have to grease every palm from here to Tallahassee, it's getting done. Ava just looked at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. Oh, Mr. Rexford, she murmured. You really shouldn't have said that out loud. This was our leverage. Armed with this, and the HOA's own bylaws, which, ironically, Grandpa had helped draft decades ago to protect residents from overreach, we launched our counteroffensive. Article 7, Section 4. A petition signed by 25% of homeowners in good standing may compel the board to schedule a special meeting for policy review and potential referendum. The petition drive was an experience. Dolores, Mr. Howard, and a few other old-timers became my canvassing crew. We went door to door. Some slammed doors in our faces. Chad the lawyer threatened to sue me for harassment. But others, emboldened by Lena's article and weary of Rexford's iron rule, signed, surprisingly, a few younger families, initially swayed by the progress narrative, listened to our evidence and added their names. The growing dissent culminated in an impromptu showdown outside the HOA Community Center a week later. Our side, a motley crew in t-shirts Ava had quickly printed with Save Our Swamp and a stylized mangrove route, faced off against Rexford's supporters, mostly the Kiales and Callaway golf shirts crowd, holding pre-printed signs. The future is concrete and Pelican shores. Progress, not preservation. It was tense. A few shouted epithets exchanged, but mostly just a stark visual of a community divided. That night, as the first official weather advisory crackled over the radio, Tropical Storm Althea, currently a disorganized swirl in the Caribbean, but projected to strengthen and track towards southwest Florida within 72 hours. I climbed the watchtower. The air was thick. Expectant, I cleaned the soot from Grandpa's oil lamp chimney, filled the reservoir, and lit the wick. The flame caught, small at first, then steady, casting a warm, defiant glow against the encroaching darkness and the increasingly agitated rustle of the mangroves. This wasn't just a ritual anymore. It was a promise, a passing of the torch. We would hold the line. The next morning, as Althea was upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane, a young man approached me while I was securing storm shutters on Grandpa's house. He looked pale and nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. It was Julian Rexford, Bartholomew's son, a biology major at the State University. Home for the summer. I'd seen him around, always looking uncomfortable in his father's overbearing presence. Monsieur Tran, he mumbled, clutching a manila envelope. I can't let him do this. What he's planning for the mangroves. It's ecologically catastrophic. And the other stuff? He trailed off, then thrust the envelope at me. These are copies of my father's internal emails and some private ledgers related to the Mangrove reclamation project. He doesn't know I know his passwords. Please, just use them. Stop him." Before I could say much more than a stunned thank you, he was gone, disappearing as quickly as he'd arrived. Ava's eyes nearly popped out of her head when she saw the contents. Emails explicitly discussing kickback schemes with contractors, strategies to circumvent environmental impact studies, and disdainful references to tree-hugging holdouts. The ledgers detailed offshore accounts. This was the smoking gun, delivered by the Dauphin himself. The emergency HOA meeting, forced by our petition and now supercharged by the incoming hurricane and the explosive new evidence we promised to reveal, was scheduled for the following evening. The atmosphere in Pelican Shores was electric, a potent cocktail of fear from the approaching storm and furious anticipation for the showdown. Rexford was about to face a hurricane of his own making, and I, Maitran, granddaughter of a mangrove defender, armed with truth, a dedicated lawyer, the conscience of a whistleblower, and the unwavering spirit of the wild itself, was ready to be the storm. The emergency HOA meeting felt less like a community gathering and more like a pressure cooker about to blow. Every seat in the Pelican Shores Community Hall was filled, with residents spilling into the aisles and out the doors. Outside, the wind was picking up, palm fronds thrashing like angry serpents. Hurricane Althea was making her presence known, a fitting soundtrack to the tempest brewing indoors. Grandpa's oil lamp, which I'd brought from the watchtower and placed on the podium, a small act of defiance, flickered bravely against the draft. Rexford, looking remarkably composed despite the circumstances, or perhaps it was just high-quality Botox, launched into his defense. He presented a slick slideshow titled Pelican Shores, charting a prosperous future. He spoke of enhanced property values, modern amenities, and responsible development. Chad the lawyer and a few other young, ambitious residents nodded vigorously, their faces alight with the promise of profit. "This isn't about destroying nature," Rexford purred, his voice smooth as a freshly paved road. "It's about improving it, making it accessible, making it valuable for all of us." Then it was my turn. Ava stood beside me, a calming presence, our stack of evidence neatly organized. "Mr. Rexford speaks of value," I began, my voice amplified by the microphone. Surprisingly steady. "Let's talk about real value." One by one, I laid it out. The biological data from our monitoring station, proving the mangroves were a thriving nursery for countless species, including the potentially new bird I'd tentatively named the mangrove azure wing. The historical stewardship agreement with the county. The preliminary findings from the archaeologist Ava had contacted, strongly suggesting the ancient shell Midden Grandpa had noted was indeed a significant Calusa site, requiring immediate protection and further study. A murmur went through the crowd. Then, the audio recording, Rexford's voice, booming and arrogant. "Clear that goddamn swamp. If I have to grease every palm from here to Tallahassee, it's getting done." Gasps, shocked faces. Rexford's composure finally cracked. A vein throbbed in his temple. "And these," I continued, my voice ringing with cold fury as Ava projected copies onto the screen, "are internal emails and ledgers provided by a source who believes in true community values. They detail Mr. Rexford's systematic bribery of officials, kickback schemes with contractors, and his deliberate intent to defraud this community and destroy a vital ecosystem for personal profit, as if orchestrated by a divine sense of timing." Phones started buzzing throughout the hall. Lena Washington's latest article on Florida Unfiltered had just dropped, titled Pelican Shores Payoffs. HOA president implicated in bribery. Corruption scandal. Leaked documents reveal all. It included damning excerpts from Julian Rexford's evidence. Simultaneously, a major news network, which had earlier aired a puff piece seemingly sympathetic to Rexford's development plans, was now being flooded with outraged comments online, linking to Lena's irrefutable proof. The narrative had shattered, live and in real time. A county commissioner, present due to the escalating controversy and the petition, stood up, his face grim. "In light of this deeply disturbing evidence," he announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, Collier County is immediately suspending all zoning changes and permits related to the Pelican Shores Mangrove Reclamation Project. Furthermore, we are launching a full investigation into these allegations of corruption. Mr. Rexford, you and your board are advised to retain counsel. Chaos erupted. Rexford, his face ashen, tried to shout over the noise but was drowned out by a chorus of angry residents. He was escorted out by sheriff's deputies who had, an hour earlier, merely been there for crowd control. The storm hit hard that night. Althea lashed the coast with furious winds and torrential rain. But the mangroves, Grandpa's beloved forest, stood their ground, a dense, tangled buffer, absorbing the storm surge, protecting the homes, even Rexford's, that lay behind them. Their value was demonstrated not in dollars, but in resilience. The aftermath was transformative. Rexford was indicted. The HOA was forced into receivership and then radically reformed. Dolores, Mr. Howard, and other long-term residents, including representatives from the few remaining fishing families, were elected to the new board. The era of the polo shirt mafia was over. With the community's blessing and initial funding from a county environmental grant, I began to realize a dream born from Grandpa's legacy. The Pelican Shores Mangrove Research and Education Center. It would be a place for science, for learning, for locals and visitors alike to understand the critical role of these coastal forests. Dolores's bright, curious 5-year-old daughter, Ling, became my unofficial junior apprentice. Armed with a tiny pair of binoculars and an insatiable curiosity, she joined me on my walks, her delighted shrieks at spotting a crab or an egret echoing through the trees. Look! A stripy fish, the future of the mangroves, I realized, was in her bright eyes. Our fight inspired others. Ava, Mr. Howard, and I, along with activists from other coastal communities facing similar threats, formed Mangrove Heirs, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and grassroots support for protecting Florida's remaining wild wetlands. The following spring, we held the first White Egret Day Festival in Pelican Shores. It was a celebration of the mangroves, of community, and a tribute to Grandpa Martin Tran and all those who had kept the faith. Mr. Thom, the veteran whose crew Grandpa had saved, came and told his story, his voice thick with emotion. Children painted pictures of egrets, local musicians played, and for the first time in a long time, Pelican Shores felt truly united. My work with the Azure Wing gained recognition, and I found myself invited to consult with other coastal counties, helping them develop sustainable management plans for their own vital ecosystems. It felt good. This ripple effect of positive change, life settled into a new rhythm, a rhythm of purpose and cautious optimism. Then, last week, a sleek, embossed envelope arrived, a generous offer from Viridian Terra Group, a newly formed investment company, to purchase the land now encompassing the Mangrove Center and the protected forest. They spoke of eco-conscious development and enhancing community assets. The letter was signed by a CEO I'd never heard of, but the proposed holding company name, tucked away in the fine print of their prospectus, sent a chill down my spine. RXR Coastal Holdings, Rexford. Or his ghost. I looked out at the mangroves, their roots gripping the earth. Grandpa's lamp still burning bright in the window of the now bustling research center. The fight, it seemed, was never truly over. But then again, neither was our resolve. The land remembered, and so did we. What would you do if your family's land was threatened by those meant to protect it? Would you stay silent or stand your ground? This story shook me. I want to know how it made you feel. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you stand. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more.